Okay, so we're going to start by taking our 13/16 socket, and while the wheel's still on the ground and has pressure on it, we're going to break all the lug nuts loose, just a quarter of a turn each. And we did drive up onto a phone book so we could get our jack underneath the car. Okay, so we've lifted the car into the air, and we put the jack a little bit farther forward, and so that's where we want to lift us back here so that you can put your jack stand in place. So next we're just going to remove the rest of the lug nuts. Next, just remove the wheel. Okay, next we're going to remove the brake caliper and set it aside, and you don't want to hang it by the line, so make sure you have something to set it on or zip tie it up in here. And it's just two 15mm bolts. There's one up here, and then there's one right down there. Okay, so with those two bolts removed, you can remove the caliper and set it aside. And then you can just pull the brake rotor off as well, just like a tire, as long as sometimes you'll find a metal clip on here. But if there's nothing there, then you can just remove this rotor off. So just keep in mind now the rotor can fall off, so you want to be careful about that. If it's not coming off it, you don't have to necessarily remove it. And if you're going to do that, go ahead and put a lug nut on here to where if it falls off, it'll catch it. And but you can leave this on here. Just if it comes right off, it's probably easier to take it right off and have more room to work. Okay, next on the strut, we're going to come in and remove these two bolts. This one's missing one here, but this is just for the bracket, and it's going to be a 24mm. Next, we're going to take our 1/4" ratcheting wrench here, or a socket if you needed to, and we're going after this little small bolt that holds on the ABS sensor. Okay, next the ABS sensor comes right out, and with this bracket loosened, you can remove it as well. Now we'll remove the two bolts here on the strut. Okay, and then right under the control arm here, we're just going to support the control arm as we continue to disassemble these things. And now we're going to take off this top nut here for the front sway bar. Okay, we're going to use a 15mm for this. Okay, now as you spin this cylinder will also spin, so you want to get a 3/8 inch wrench and put it right there so you can hold it still while you break it loose. Okay, so as you remove this nut, you can now pull off this little bushing here, and then as we lower the control arm, it'll just come out from the sway bar. So now we're going to finally remove these two bolts here, and remember, we want to make sure that our jack is supporting the control arm right now. Okay, with these 24mm nuts off, you can now tap out the bolts, and that can be how you know if there's too much pressure or not. If they're really tough coming out, you can lift and lower the jack as needed, but they should just punch right out, both of these. If it helps, you can use an extension to tap this bolt out. Just keep in mind that this whole knuckle will fall forward when it's released. Okay, so with everything disconnected, now we can lower the control arm with the jack, and we may have to push down a little bit too. This car already has lowering springs on it, so that spring will likely just pop right out. But if you have a stock spring, you might have to push down on this and pop that spring out. Okay, so we lowered the control arm down, and you can see it made plenty of room here. Okay, so with the jack out of the way and plenty more room, you can push down on this and then just pull this spring out. Now keep in mind the flat part of the spring goes on the top, where there's also normally an isolator or a little rubber bushing, and then in the bottom here you can see where the spring starts, right on that lip. Now we have a new set of lower isolators here. This is the bottom of the spring, and if you have to reuse yours, they just slide right off and you slide the new one back on. Okay, so yeah, this is the new lower isolator here, and so the factory one was rounded and cut. So all you'd do is slide this right back on. There you go. So just slide it till it pretty much comes on right about there. And so now the top isolator part just sits right on the top here, and you're going to feed this in first and then put the spring into the lower control arm. And so what Eibach's specific instructions are, we even call them to verify, is they want you starting the spring between the two weep holes here in the bottom here. So even though you can see the lip here where the spring starts, they recommend that you set it here and then lift on it, and it will likely seat into there. But that was the specific instructions that they gave us. So that's what we're going to do, is put it right here between the two weep holes is our starting point. And we put it on the top first. So we put the spring in and then down. Now all we're going to do is lift it back up. And as we lift it up, we just have to guide our sway bar link back through the sway bar, and then line up our knuckle here back into the strut. So what we did is we pushed on this as we lifted with the jack so that we could guide this right back up into the sway bar. It takes a little bit of pressure, and so we were pushing that forward just to get it to go into the sway bar. Okay, now on this one you can tell the cleaner side is going to be the top side where the nut was. So just make sure we put this back on. So next you're going to want to put this 15mm nut back on, and when you tighten this down you got to hold it so it doesn't spin like we did to remove it, and you want to have just the perfect little bit of smash to this. You don't want to go too tight, it just needs to mushroom just a little bit. Put both of our bolts in here to secure our strut. Okay, now on these bolts we're going to run a nice little bead of Loctite and reinstall our nuts. Okay, so we have a 13/16 on this side and a 24mm on this side, just to hold it still as we tighten this down. So we're going to do that for the top and the bottom. So now as we're going to reinstall this ABS sensor, something I want to point out is it is magnetic, and it's going to have all these metal shavings on it. You want to clean those off so that you don't get an ABS light. So once it's cleaned up, we're just putting it right back down into that hole and using that 1/4" drive bolt to tighten it down. Okay, now we went ahead and reinstalled the nut here that holds the bracket on. So we just put our bracket back on, put that one on there, and there should be another one there perhaps. It looks like we're missing one. That will be okay, it's just a bracket here. Next we're going to reinstall the caliper, so it just slides right back over the rotor, and nothing should have changed here, so it should slide right back on. And remember, the caliper goes on the inside here of where it mounts. Okay, so we got our Loctite on these bolts here for the brake caliper, and we're just tightening these down now. Alright, next we're going to put the wheel back on. Okay, now reinstall the wheel, and you want to tighten in the star pattern. This lug nut, the nut one, over like that, and then go over it a few times. And we like to put just a little bit of weight from the vehicle on it so the tire doesn't spin, or you could have somebody hold the brake for you if you wanted, but we're going to torque this down to about 100 foot. Okay, so these are the recommended lift points, and basically what we're wanting to do here, we need to get jack stands in the rear of the car, and you can't put them on the axle because we're lowering the axle. So if you come and lift here from somewhat towards the front of the car, it will still lift the back of the car into the air. So as you see, we've lifted here, and if you have subframe connectors like this, that was actually a better place to lift. But you want the jack stands to go right on those torque boxes as it was shown there, and so you don't break any pinch welds. Next, you're going to come in and just remove the wheel, and so that's pretty straightforward. Take the lug nuts off and just get that wheel moved out of the way. And from here now we're going to bring a jack in, and we're going to slightly lift up on the rear axle to get this strut loose. So this is a 15mm and an 18mm are the two sizes you'll need. And so as you'll see with the jack here, we're going to slightly lift with the jack as we're taking this off to get the pressure just right to pull the bolt out. And so as you'll see here, I'll readjust the jack, and it gets it just right to pull that bolt out. And personally, I like to put the bolts right back in the way that they came. So on reinstallation, it's the same. And then we're just going to come to the other side and do the same thing. And after this, we'll remove the quad shock. Alright, so the next part is to take off this stabilizer strut. And to do that, we're going to just put a 15 millimeter wrench on here and pound on it to loosen it. If you look close right here, this looks like a little nut, but it's not. It's actually either welded to this or whatnot. So we're going to go on the back side of it, pound it loose. Alright, so after we get this bolt out, we're just going to move the stabilizer up out of the way and put the bolt back through so we don't lose it. So with one side of the axle supported by either another jack or a jack stand, you'll come over and with your other floor jack let that one side down at a time. And as you can see here, the spring will let loose to the point where you can pry it out. And in this video there's no axle because it was a different repair, but it's the same thing. So just disregard that. All you have to remove is the strut and that quad shock. Now when you pull the old spring out, you put the isolator in the top of the new spring and feed that new spring in towards the top first, and then put the bottom of the spring back down onto the control arm or back onto the axle. Now, the spring placement doesn't matter as long as both of them are the same, where the pigtail starts right here at the bottom. So as long as both springs are starting at the same place on each side, then you're okay. Okay, so a little trick with the strut to get the bolt to line up just the way you want it to is slightly lift the control arm a little higher than the strut. And then if you can compress the strut slightly, that seems to be the perfect angle to get that bolt right through. Anyway, thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions on the repair. Just put it in the comments. Thanks, guys.